Greetings, YouTube. I found myself thinking about inheritance recently. Not that I plan on inheriting anything in the near future. I'm probably not going to get a whole lot when my parents finally pass on. But inheritance in general, and specifically the inheritance of the wealthy and the powerful. Currently reading a book about the history of the Maine coast from its earliest inception in the 1700s when the Europeans showed up until the present. Not that the Native Americans weren't there, and long before the Europeans invaded, of course. And in a world with magic that can bring people back from the dead, raise dead, and resurrection in D&D or Pathfinder is an example. Reincarnation as well. Reincarnation is probably in a different wheelhouse. So I'm just going to pay attention to raise dead and resurrection. Something that brings you back as you. Okay? No question, it is you. Now, for your average person, that's completely and utterly outside the realms of reality. Resurrection or raised dead is about as likely as me ending up on the International Space Station. It just isn't going to happen. So you don't have to worry about it. And adventurers, they're a different lot. Adventurers can have access to these kinds of magic in a much higher degree than probably any other group there is out there. I can remember back in first edition, raising dead and resurrection was like changing clothes. It was absurd. But in a more, realistic manner, even though we're talking about magic, for the very wealthy, like merchant houses, and for nobles and royalty, these spells become realistically achievable because they've got power and influence. And people want to influence them, so raised dead and resurrections are good ways of doing that. When you can tell someone, hey, I can bring your father or your mother, your brother, your sister back from the dead, that buys you a lot of political influence. But it also buys you a lot of complications. What do you do about inheritance, physical inheritance, like land, homes, money, items in particular, say a family treasure of some variety? And what do you do about titles? Now, as far as the money end of it, say merchant houses, very wealthy non-nobles and non-royals, I think you're pretty much screwed. In my opinion, once you're dead, everything switches over to whoever you left it for. However, I could see developing in structured societies, with societies structured enough to have nobility and royalty, the ability to create kind of a self-inheritance contract, where you would be allowed to put some percentage of your family, your worth, into this account, say 10% or 20%. So that in the event you die and are come back from the dead, that account then goes to the person that has been raised. This would prevent a real douche nozzle from putting their entire estate into this self-resurrection account, knowing with the knowledge they'll never be resurrected because they don't want to be or because they don't have the money to do it, just so it keeps their family members from ever getting their inheritance. So there'd be some limit. You can only put X amount of money in this account, but the account can't be touched, ever. It's there for your character, your person, your whatever, until you come back from the dead, then can access it. This would enable a person to come back and have some resources and to start their life over again, because the rest of their estate has gone off to whoever the people were supposed to get it. Because society's complex enough to have nobility and royalty structures and things, also have the ability to sue and judgment and things like that. So even if you didn't leave something put aside for yourself, if you tried to leave it all, there would be courts that would probably say, no, you can't do that, and they would disseminate it anyway while you're dead, and then you come back and you've got nothing. So if you put some small section aside, enough that your relatives aren't going to consider that selfish of you, they're probably going to let it ride. Also, there's a possibility that it may affect them as well. So they may not want to touch that account simply because, well, I don't want someone to touch my resurrection account. So I think just for monetary things, inheritance of like that nature, you could probably have a system set up that would protect you to an extent, so you don't come back and you're not a pauper. Now, as far as titles of the noble and of the royal variety, I've been thinking about this. And you can't have someone who's like a duke or a count or a king or a princess or something, or a vizier, whatever have you, Marquesa, come back as a commoner. You just can't do that. It would destroy the whole structure. But you also can't have them stepping back into their old position, because that position is now passed on to whoever got the title after they died. So I think when they come back, they get bumped to the next level down, and they can never ascend to the level of the top tier. So if they're a king or a queen and they die and they come back, there would be a duke or duchess, and they can never be king, queen again. But if they were, say, a baron or a baroness and they get bumped down to lord or lady, they could rise back up to a baron and baroness, and they could continue all the way up past that, but they could never hold the top tier of king or queen. Essentially, making sure that the dead don't monopolize the true power, seat of power in any particular country, because the wealthy can keep coming back over and over and over again. So that would allow them to maintain some political influence and power, but not all of it. It would help to prevent a self-dynasty, if you will. Now, there are going to be some countries where this is going to be completely not allowed, flat out. They're just going to say you can't come, if you come back from the dead, you have no political power, you have no economic power. They consider you a monster. So that's a social control on these particular spells. But there's nothing preventing your character from scraping together some aspects of their former life and moving to another country where they're not known and starting over again. And potentially maybe raising an army or something and coming back and claiming their rightful position. There's a lot of role-playing options in there. I know I've seen prestige classes where one of the buy-ins to that prestige class is you have to have been raised from the dead, because you are now part of the very stuff of the netherworld, because you've been there and back. So there are a lot of things to play with here. Anything else I can think of on this particular topic? No, I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about when it comes to inheritance and titles and money. So I'd like to hear, what have you used it in the past, and what would you do in the future? Now, we never had this issue. It was always player characters coming back from the dead. So, and a lot of the time it was happening so rapidly, nobody outside the party ever knew they even died. So it wasn't like it was, it was just stories. It was bard's tales, as opposed to going to have any effect on inheritance and titles. And while some of the characters did have titles, and some of them had kids, again, it was all inter-party in the sense that no one in the party was going to let their buddies or just associates' wealth be dissipated and taken away when they knew that very shortly this person's coming back from the dead. So they make sure that the family members are taken care of, but we know this person's coming back. So, don't take all their inheritance, kind of thing. So, what have you done in the past, and what would you do in the future? I can tell you right now that if this ever to pop up in a society, in a D&D or a Pathfinder system, that's how pretty much I would run it. So long as I'm dealing with a country that has that kind of existing economic and political structure. Nations that have far less rigid structures may handle it much differently, and it's going to be really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. How do Scotch-style tribes handle it? How do barbarian groups handle it? What do the orcs do? So it's going to be very different. But when we're talking about the higher-end structures amongst the elves and the humans and the dwarves and the gnomes and the halflings, what have you, all those the human races essentially, what do they do? And I think that having them bump down one title level and having the ability to set up some kind of a contract so that some of their wealth is preserved in case they come back is probably the smartest thing to do. So, tell me, what do you think?